My name is Drew. I'm a senior from the University of Utah, and I'll be presenting today on how branding influences our willingness to pay for necessity products. And to begin, I want to give everybody an overview of what my research is and why I find it to be important. And it starts by recognizing that marketing influences all of our wants and desires. And this is something I first started thinking about as a little kid when I realized the commercials I was watching on Boomerang on Saturday mornings weren't the same ones that I was seeing watching Sunday Night Football with my dad. But why is that, I wondered? Everyday decisions like what I eat for dinner, what clothes I wear, and what toothpaste I use when I'm brushing my teeth are constantly being influenced by the advertisements that I see. But even larger purchases, like the car that I'm driving, are heavily influenced by the marketing efforts that I'm exposed to. And so this got me thinking, are these same efforts being used to influence how much I'm willing to pay for a necessity product? Or even what I view as a necessity product? And if so, what does this mean for the average consumer? Is this even a bad thing? Well, to try and answer these questions, I decided to look at the impact of different marketing tactics on the willingness to pay for necessity products. Now, I've defined necessity products as those with which you cannot live without, in a modern sense. So, of course, this includes things like water, food, and shelter, but it also includes products that are increasingly becoming a requirement to the function of modern society. So, things like internet access. Well, after looking at various products that I could use for my research, I settled on using bottled water as my necessity product. And this is because it's a product selling one of our most basic human needs, water. The product is also well into its life cycle, and so it has a variety of different brands, included at a variety of different price points, using a variety of different marketing techniques to try and get consumers to purchase the product. It's also been gaining more and more popularity over the years, and it's now America's go-to beverage, including over soda. And this is despite the fact that it's available for nearly free from the tap. So with the product in mind, I then chose to study brand and how customers' perceptions of a brand are going to influence how much they're willing to pay for a company's version of that product. And so as an example, a customer's willing to pay more for a Nike branded running shoe. And so I wanted to know, would this hold true for bottled water as well? To do so, I chose to look at 4 different levels of brand. Municipal water, so think the very basics, like tap water. Then the store brand, so something like Kirkland brand that you might find at Costco. Then national brands, and so this includes Dasani and Arrowhead. And then also international brands, so including things like Evian and then Fiji as well. And then I also chose to study distributional availability. For many products, the supply side of things plays an important role in the appeal of the product. So again, let's use Nike shoes as an example. Over the past few decades, a small fraction of the company's shoe releases have had extremely limited releases. And this dramatically reduces their distributional availability and increases the price people who want the product are willing to pay for it, because it now has that exclusivity factor. So I wanted to see if if the same thing would be the case for bottled water. Would people get excited about the opportunity to have a more exclusive version? To test this, I created different levels, including broad distribution and kind of available everywhere, selective distribution, available only in a few different stores or locations, and then exclusive distribution. Maybe only Walmart carries it, or it's only available for a limited amount of time. And then finally, I wanted to test some additional variables to see if there's anything about the respondents themselves that's affecting our results. I hypothesized that individuals who are health conscious would be willing to pay more for bottled water, and that individuals who are environmentally conscious would be willing to pay less. Now, I thought about this in the sense that those who are health conscious are going to be more willing to drink water over different options that they're given, including things like the different options for soda, juice, or coffee. And because of that, they might be willing to pay more for the bottled water product as opposed to something else. And I thought that individuals who are environmentally conscious would be more cognizant of the detrimental impact that bottled water can have on the environment. Kind of ironically, it ends up taking a decent amount of water that's getting used in order to produce each bottle of consumable water. And these bottles are also single-use plastics that often get left in landfills and take a very long time to decompose. And so there's some externalities involved with drinking bottled water that environmentally conscious people may be more aware of, and therefore it may dissuade them from wanting to use the product. So after identifying the variables that I wanted to use for my survey, I decided to use a conjoint analysis. And conjoint analysis is relatively unique in the sense that it can provide relatively accurate willingness to pay data for the variables that are tested. And this is important because a normal survey is actually pretty bad at it. And it turns out that when you ask somebody to tell you how much they're willing to pay for a gallon of milk, and they say $1.50, when you ask if they're willing to pay $1.51, they're almost always going to be willing. And so this means that when you ask people about their willingness to pay in a normal survey, they're going to be giving you incorrect data. So to combat this, a conjoint survey goes about those questions a little bit differently. Instead of asking consumers to rate different attributes and their levels based on their preference, a conjoint analysis presents customers with an example product and allows them to rank it on a scale. I chose to use a 7-point scale, with 7 being the most favorable. Each choice that was presented to respondents cost either $1, $1.25, or $1.50, and then had different variations of the brand of the product as well as the distributional availability. Now, in terms of price, I reached those numbers after observing the cost of the water at a local retail establishment and determined some averages. Respondents were presented with 12 such questions before then being asked a set of questions about the 2 behavioral variables. Try saying that 5 times fast. Environmental and health consciousness. Then, using some fancy math, this allowed us to determine the actual willingness to pay for each level of each variable tested, meaning we were able to understand exactly how much somebody would be willing to pay for municipal branded water versus international branded water, and how much somebody would be willing to pay for municipally branded water that cost $1.25 and was exclusively available as compared to a store branded bottle of water that cost $1 that was actually broadly available. And those comparisons allow us to draw some really interesting conclusions, which we'll get to later. And so after surveying about 130 University of Utah students, it became clear that brand was an influential factor to willingness to pay. And so it turns out that when comparing a municipal brand to that of an international brand, respondents were willing to pay a 20% premium for the international brand. And the international brand even carried a strong premium over the national brand. And so you might be thinking, well, 20%, is that really that important? Is that much? And when you look at that overall cost of bottled water, it actually becomes pretty startling. It's a big deal. When you consider that a municipal branded bottle of water might cost $1, that 20% premium makes that purchase $1.20 instead. And so this can actually have a really big impact on the profitability of the firm and allows companies that have a better brand image to hike up those prices and gain more profits while selling relatively the same product, relatively the same cost structure involved as well. And so this means that even though both bottles of water, the municipal version and the international version, both satisfy that same tenet of hydration, if one were given the opportunity to drink the international brand, they'd wind up paying a significant price premium to do so. And this gives brands like Fiji Water a significant advantage over local brands based strictly on the brand association that customers have with the product. This doesn't even factor taste into the equation. And this strong brand association happens despite evidence showing that most customers are unable to perceive the difference between tap water and higher-ended bottled water, with various studies showing that tap water can score higher than different versions of bottled water. We also saw that this relationship with brand was very linear, which seems to indicate that the prices provided were well within the range of normal willingness to pay for the product. The difference in part worths, or the value that we derive through our conjoint analysis, stays on a steady decline when moving up from municipal brands to international brands. This finding is also supported by the fact that these prices were determined by observing local prices out in the wild for the bottled water. And so this means that there's a good possibility that bottled water companies already have a strong grasp of what people are willing to pay for their product and carefully ensure that they fit within that normal range of distribution of prices. And so while brand was clearly influential in terms of willingness to pay, it turns out that distributional availability had no such effect. And while that might be surprising, it seems to support the notion that bottled water is a necessity product, as there isn't an appeal to having a limited supply. While some products seem to increase in appeal with further exclusivity, the utility that bottled water brings seems to preclude it from such phenomena. And I think it's important to note that while customers aren't willing to pay more for a product, a necessity product, just because it's exclusive, it doesn't mean that supply and demand doesn't have a dramatic impact on willingness to pay for the product. If we look at insulin, the inflating prices of the product have done little to stem the demand here in the United States simply because it's a necessity for survival. Customers don't have an option to choose an alternative. And so while the exclusivity itself isn't driving an increase in price, an overall exclusivity will hike up those prices as customers are willing to pay whatever necessary in order to get that product. And finally, we see that the antecedent variables, the health consciousness and the environmental consciousness, also didn't impact the results at all. And this ended up surprising me a little bit, but it does make sense with the context that bottled water is a necessity product. While health consciousness may impact someone's willingness to pick a salad over a Big Mac, it's going to do little to dissuade them from pursuing their basic need of hydration. And the same can be said about environmental consciousness. Despite the fact that water is packaged in single-use plastics that can be damaging for the environment, these customers were not dissuaded from spending more on the product because of its offered utility. And so what does this mean in today's day and age? Why does this matter at all? Well, as more and more products are becoming virtual necessities to the modern way of life, this can have an important impact on the way that pricing decisions are made. We can think of glasses and effective vision and how they're now a virtual requirement for many jobs, especially now after the pandemic, with the increasing number of them that are done virtually over a computer. For people who have poor natural vision, being able to see clearly opens up a world of accessibility. Their ability to see the finer print and read and write in ways that they're able to envision effectively rather than having to squint or strictly being unable to, allows them to get higher paying jobs and do various different things that they otherwise might not have been able to. Another example is driving. In many parts of the country, public transportation isn't a strong suit. And so in order to get around, a car has become a virtual requirement. And so unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, in order to drive a car legally in the United States, you have to have car insurance. And if anybody's watched TV recently, they know there's no shortage of impressionable brands for car insurance. You can think of Progressive, Allstate, 1-800 The General. There's a litany of different brands that are all vying for you to purchase their car insurance. And so when we look at all of these and many other product categories, the influence of marketing that marketing can play on these different decisions is really nothing to scoff at. And these decisions may end up having consequences as to the prices for our basic needs as they get inflated past the cost of production in the pursuit of profit. Now, as I mentioned before, we're already seeing that with some necessities such as insulin as the prices skyrocketed in the past few decades. But as many of these products are ubiquitous across the US and in late stage cycles with dominant brand names, it's unlikely that we're going to see any government intervention to prevent these price increases. And so, as marketers, it's important to maintain an ethical perspective on the product that we are selling. And when given the opportunity to weigh profit against availability and success, it's important to keep in mind that sometimes there's going to be an ethical dilemma here. With that being said, it's not always a requirement to ensure that every potential customer can afford the product. Think of luxury leather goods. Uh, you might want to buy the $300 wallet, but it really is a want. It's superfluous and there's no need for it. The same utility can be provided with a $5 wallet from the gas station. However, when the product is a need, marketers must hold themselves accountable to a higher standard, higher than that strictly of profit, and take time to consider the impact that pricing decisions will have on the lives of people across the globe. And from a consumer perspective, there's really little that can be done to explicitly combat the marketing efforts of firms selling necessity products. Sure, you can choose to boycott some things, but again, these products are needs, and so there's only so much that you can do to prevent your purchasing of the product. However, staying vigilant to the tactics that marketers are going to use to get you to consider their more expensive product can go a long way to making sure that you're making educated purchasing decisions and preventing unnecessary spend. So thank you for spending some time with me and learning a little bit more about how branding is influencing the willingness to pay for bottled water and allowing me to discuss what this might mean for products in general moving forward. I appreciate you spending some time with me today.